All right, welcome to the Igniting Impact podcast brought to you by Public Knowledge. I'm Stacy Moss, the host of the podcast and the president of our management consulting firm. Our firm's vision is to be a catalyst for change, leaving each person, project, client, colleague, and community better than when we started. The Igniting Impact podcast is an opportunity to share with you what our clients do daily to impact our world. We want to highlight this essential work and the work that they do for their customers and stakeholders that is changing lives despite the many daily challenges that they face. On today's episode, we have two guests with us, Lamar Smith and Glenda McMillan, and they are here today to discuss our public knowledge child welfare vision, the work that we do in this industry with our clients, and the change that we hope to see in the child welfare system in the future. Let's start by just getting to know you both a bit more. If you would tell us a bit about yourself, what you do for work right now, and how you got there, what you did before public knowledge, whichever of you would like to start.
Go ahead, Lamar.
Okay, so I'm Lamar Smith. I've worked with PK for about 2.5 years now, but before that worked in public child welfare for nearly 25 years in both New Jersey and Georgia's child welfare systems, primarily in the space of well-being and training before leading DeKalb County's child welfare system, and then, of course, joining management consulting. And I come to the work because ultimately, for me, family is sacred. And so that's where I begin to end the work.
Great. Thanks, Lamar. Glenda?
Hi, I'm Glenda, and I have been with PK for 9.5 years. And prior to that, I worked in public child welfare and human services, first in Georgia, and there's an intersection there between my work and Lamar's work in the state of Georgia. I served it from frontline worker to regional director, and was a part of the work that started the Kenny A process. I served as director and regional director for both DeKalb and Fulton counties, the two largest counties in the state. I then moved to Texas to work in eligibility operations as the Associate Commissioner for Health and Human Services, Health and Human Services Commission. We then found my way to PK, which was a great landing place. I have always wanted to have impact on the child welfare system, the work with families, and the greater work in human services. And that's where I am today, enjoying it.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I always felt like working, child by child or family by family was really hard and really, really fulfilling. But working at that next level up, like you said, Glenda, is so much fun in a different way. Not as personal, but definitely feeling like you have a little bit more of an impact than you do case by case. All right, well, let's get to know you both on a more personal level. So tell us a little bit about who you are outside of work and what values you live by.
Outside of work, I'm the mom of 2 adult daughters. It's hard to imagine them being adults at this point, but that happened while I wasn't watching. Yeah. I live by the concept of service to others. My belief, my mantra is that I was put on this earth to help other people in a transparent, meaningful, engaging way. And so everything that I do, I try to live by that mantra. I am here to serve others.
That's great.
My work is pouring that out, and I will continue to do that until I can't anymore.
Lamar?
It's interesting. Glenda and I have our lives intersect in many ways. And without disclosing, because Glenda didn't disclose something I'm going to disclose for her, we're actually both from South Carolina.
Oh,
I hope that's okay to say. Yeah, so I really am, at heart, I feel like a country boy from South Carolina. And I've lived now the majority of my adult life in Atlanta. It's just me and my dog. But I am family oriented and always have been. Insanely close to my grandparents and parents, and just a large family. And for me, there's just always been this sense of like civic duty and really representing those who didn't have a voice for themselves before I even really knew what that meant, or being incredibly intrigued with people's stories and where I met them, right? I remember early on, my grandmother would tell me a story where I would always ask if I saw somebody walking with a limp, and it wasn't enough for me to assume. I would ask, or I would want to ask them what happened. And we find ourselves now, when we think about families and communities who've been exposed to prolonged trauma, what happened, right? Not to assume. And so I think just being incredibly fascinated with people, wanting better for people, wanting to amplify voices of those who have been marginalized or disenfranchised, that has really fueled my passion for my work on behalf of children and families for now over 2 decades.
I feel like there's almost always a similar theme with people that get into child welfare around that service to others. And then I would say, you said it, like interest in people. I think that like empathy, right? Like that empathy bone or muscle seems to always be present in people that I meet that come out of a child welfare background. So I love that you both highlighted them. Okay, well, today we were going to talk a little bit more about Public Knowledge's child welfare vision. So I'm hoping you guys can just help create a little bit of background information about what's in it. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we created it or how it came to be. And then if you guys want to add in a bit about what it is and kind of how we use it, that would be super helpful. We have actually a community of practice that's focused on our child welfare work at the firm, focused on kind of what's happening, what's changing, the types of projects that we're in, sharing those resources across states and projects. And so a small group of that COP got together to develop the first draft of this child welfare vision. And then it was taken back to the full community of practice to adjust and to make changes and additions and edits. And so really, this document isn't ours, right? Like the three of us, it's owned by that community of practice. Although I think we've all had, input into it over the last few years, but really kind of its purpose is to guide our work as a company and to really, put into the public space where we stand on a lot of kind of hot issues in child welfare and be a little bit bold about where we want to see the system go, which I think is a little bit unique comparing us to our competitors. So why don't you share a little bit about what's in it and other ways that we have used it or are planning to use it?
So in the context of the work, right, we refer to this industry as child welfare, right? That's what it is. For us at PK, we really have been intentional around shifting our mindset, I believe, and our way of work to one that is a system of child and family well-being. And there are 9 areas that really encapsulate that. I don't want to go through and list them all, but as you mentioned, Stacey, there's some hot button things, right? Or some things that have resonated over the past several years in the work. And certainly back in 2018, there was the Family First and Prevention Services Act, right? And so there's one part of our vision where we really talk about what are new and innovative ways to create a flexible financing model that supports families. And so we could talk about that in greater detail at some point. And then certainly with the shift that's happening around the country, not only in child welfare, but as we work and live and play in America, equity. And so how do we support families and communities in a way that is equitable is really top of mind, and work that happens not only in our work related to child welfare, but across our other industries here at PK. But investing in whole families. Many times systems organize themselves, right, by specific topic, child welfare, child support, or financing or programs. But families don't navigate that way, right? Mm-hmm. Families, are dynamic. Families have needs. Families don't separate education from healthcare. If a child is sick, that impacts if they can go to school. So how do you really begin to think about a systems approach and investing in whole families? And then as we talk about shifting from child welfare to child well-being, what does that mean? How do we know when families are better off? And how do we measure that? What does success look like? So really being very precise in defining what those measures are. So those are some things that are top of mind for me when I really tick off some of the 9 areas that are top of mind for me. And then first and foremost is, how do we keep families together? So really ending unnecessary separation, right? This is at the heart of this. How do we keep families and communities whole, thriving, and vibrant?
Glenda, what's top of mind for you?
Top of mind for me is moving from that space where we identify how we support families, or that there is a need to support families and families should be the focus, is engaging families. We often identify technical and adaptive challenges. And it's important to recognize which is which, and then how do we engage families in being part of the solution. And so one of the things that stands out for me is the level playing field for families. How do we help to identify and acknowledge where we are bringing them into the conversation and creating a level playing field for their engagement, and that their solutions are just as important and just as much acknowledged as any that might come from a quote unquote child welfare professional. So investing in whole families, investing in their ideas, investing in their communities, those are the things that we perceive as part of the well-being process as we engage with agencies that support families and building capacity for families to grow and become viable parts of the community, as many of our communities expect from them. But building their capacity, engaging them in their solutioning, and helping them to be healthy and thriving families.
I love that, because we often talk about the professionals in the child welfare system when really the professionals about a family are the people in that family, right? They're the experts. They know the most. We may be there to support, right? But oftentimes we're not the expert in the room when it comes to that.
And I think there needs to be a paradigm shift from giving them permission to asking for permission.
Yes. I love that. For those of our listeners who are not familiar with the child welfare world, we know why child welfare intersects with, you talked about equity, Lamar. We know why it intersects with diversity and inclusion and equity. But for our listeners that don't, do one of you want to explain why they are often talked about together?
For many years, and I won't begin to quote dates, but in the 70s and 80s, right? But certainly before then, professionals really began to socialize, and through looking at data, that there was something that couldn't be ignored, that there was this disproportionality in children of color being represented in the foster care system. And really beginning to look at and evaluate and assess what were some of the levers that contributed to this, right? Not that families of color disproportionately do harm to their children, but what were these levers? Were there specific legislative measures, perhaps, that had intended or unintended consequences that led to this? Certainly, we've not talked about yet poverty. But how is poverty many times conflated with neglect? And what does that look like? And when we talk about intersectionality and we talk about a child welfare system, I've always been very clear to say the child welfare system, right, is certainly more than just the child welfare agency. And so when we think about child and family serving agencies and those that impact levers, right, in a good way or bad way, education, healthcare, any numbers, transportation, law enforcement, medical, your judicial systems, all of these things play into how families are surveilled, and ultimately how families are then presented to, or a pipeline to child welfare or to other systems that have interventions that many times leave families not better off. And you heard me talk about that a few minutes earlier. As we are shifting, how do we ensure that we leave families better off than, and I don't want to say found, because to say that you found somebody implies that they were lost than when we met them. Yeah. So that's chiefly one of the things around equity. One, around disproportionality around the families who are presented to the system, also inequity in the workforce. And where you find leadership in the workforce, what are the service models, the practice models that are used as interventions? Do they represent the families that they are supposedly designed to support, help, aid, and equip? So all of these inequities are baked into a system that further exacerbate the problem.
Glenda, anything to add to that around
I would add the system's responsibility for defining measures to accurately assess those particular areas, as opposed to the standard generic bureaucracy that we manage to report out on year over year. And I think it's important that we redefine the way we measure success in child welfare.
Yeah, I love that. I feel like there's so many things that we need to reevaluate and redefine and reimagine and in this area, because we've been doing things very similarly for a long, long time, at least as long as I've been in the field, and finding new ways and innovative ways to serve families and to measure that success, I think is where we're at right now, at least for our work, which is exciting. So what do you think the need is that we were answering with this child welfare vision?
I think part of the need, I think there's several responses to that would be accurate, but part of the need is to address the bureaucracy. It is so easy to create a system that eventually feeds on itself with less and less regard for its original intention, and more to maintain the bureaucracy without intention, right?
Yeah.
So I think the need is to provide a level of clarity about what the real goal is. I think the need is to humanize human services.
I love that. Yeah, humanize human services is such an important, because we get caught up in the bureaucracy of the programs and the projects that are serving the kids and the case plans and the services without remembering, right, the humans in front of us. I remember just the shift in the legal world in child welfare around using kids and parents' names rather than like case numbers when I was practicing and I was in the courtroom. Just that small little shift of going from, docket number, blah, 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 to, Eva and George was just such a huge growth area, I think, in that humanizing. And I think better decisions were made from it. And I've seen that in other places as well.
And I think in planning our work and internally when we're planning our community of practice, even the way that we frame the language, it is about being solution focused and solution oriented. Mm-hmm. We've identified gaps, right, or opportunities or ways that we like to meet families or support families that may not be realized today. But our language and our vision is very precise in a way that is solutioned and is designed not to highlight the absence of what we want, but actually the presence of what we want. And so when you look at it and you see it articulated, to me, that should resonate for people.
Well, and it's how we want to work with families too, right? That strengths-based model, which we're kind of mimicking in this world, but I do love that it's focused on that.
It's a parallel process, right? Yeah. In the same way that you should be engaging an individual, a family, a community, an agency, a jurisdiction. It is a parallel process in the work.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit more about who's on the community of practice. So who's involved, who's active, and kind of what is the role of that community of practice for our child welfare work?
So there's so many parts of the work here at PK that I'm excited about and that I love. So I've recently transitioned into our Northeast regional vice president, but I am still closely tied to this work as a internal sponsor of the work with our child welfare industry director, which is a position that I previously held. Lindsay Nordenberg is our current child welfare industry director. And in partnership, we come together with any number of our firm's subject matter experts in child welfare but also it's important to talk to others who are outside of the space that you would not traditionally think of, right? So that we don't create an echo chamber around what we're hearing or what we think we need to hear. But we generate agendas or points of topic to talk about related to anything. We are routinely and ongoing looking at data from projects, from things that are top of mind, trends that we're seeing around the country related to what systems are wrestling with, grappling with, challenges. And then at some point, as a group of professionals or interested or concerned professionals, what's top of mind for us as we think about growth in the field, what we wish we had at some point, perhaps when we were practicing or working more closely with families, and where does all of that then intersect or come together? And so it is a time monthly for us to do just that, talk shop. And when you get a bunch of folks together who are highly concerned, highly invested in, highly interested in the work of families and their communities, talking shop is a really good time. And you get a lot of creative ideas. From that, we then create work groups. We have our education service guides, which ultimately turn into best practice and dynamic opportunities to work with our clients and other partners as well.
That's great. Glenda, anything to add?
I think that there are parallel efforts to this COP. In addition to all of the members of this particular COP, there are other COPs that share the vision and share some of the work streams. And in addition to serving as the RVP for the South region, I'm the executive sponsor for DEIB. And we share a lot of interest and effort to advance the ideas of equity and inclusion and belonging. And so the work that is happening in the child welfare COP is tantamount to the work that we're doing in the DEIB space. And I think it's important to recognize that there's that synergy that happens in this organization that I haven't seen happen other places. So it really is intriguing. First and foremost, it builds capacity for you to learn and grow and be curious, which is very important in our PK space. And it provides people with flexibility of knowing, okay, this applies to this area, but it also I can expand that knowledge and learning and applying it to our client work in multiple ways. And so I think the COP is an excellent starting place for a lot of our staff with their interest being in child welfare, but it just expands to other areas of our organization that is very supportive, and that synergy that I mentioned earlier that just works.
I've also noticed that we have a lot of new members in the COP of people that are new to PK and new to child welfare, but are excited, right, about the work that we're doing or the work that our clients are doing and the vision, that seem to have joined to kind of learn and grow and just learn alongside their colleagues who've been doing this their entire careers, which is kind of fun to see.
It is fun to see. And as we talk about parallel process and how we model the work, we always start our COP with the check-in. And it's important for us. One, we authentically and genuinely want to know how one another, how we're doing as colleagues and teammates. But as you can imagine, when you're talking about the work or the business of families, many times the conversation is heavy and what we want to talk about. So it gives us a real opportunity to really gauge, where are folks, right? Is this a topic that perhaps I need to cover today? Maybe I need to shift the topic for this week or this month and save it for next week or save it for next month. Yeah. And that is the same way that we do our work with communities, with families, and with clients, right? By really tapping into real time, where people are, really being in the moment, being self-aware, being mindful, helping others be mindful. And so it is an opportunity that we're coming together, not just for some free association, but to be mindful and intentional around the conversation, what we're talking about, investing in the time, and then what will we do as a result of the discussion that we've had on any given month about any given topic.
Lamar, that reminds me of the impact that these COPs have on something that PK offers to every employee, professional development.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think about how the COPs provide opportunity for the growth in learning, new skill sets, building existing skill sets that translates into their ability to serve clients better. And so the COP is a starting point for exposure and ideas and direction to go in a different path sometimes for people who were not interested or didn't think they were interested in child welfare, that have skill sets that are parallel or transferable to the work that child welfare presents. And so the professional development opportunity really presents itself through our COPs.
Glenda, we have a good time, don't we? Because when we think about these 9 areas of our vision, we also have strategies attached to them, right? So this community of practice gives us an opportunity also to begin to test and explore what it looks like. So for example, we've talked about financing models, or we talk about sharing power or restoring power to families. Well, how do you do that? How do you mobilize partners? So we are really getting together and testing and thinking about theory, but then how do you practically apply that to our work, and what are those strategies? And so if I were a client, I'm thinking they really have this incubator of time every month where you have 50 to 60 experts together who have since the past month looked at emerging strategies that are happening across the nation, have had an opportunity to practice and do real work with clients, and then are bringing that back together and having a conversation, thinking about it, 60 experts on a line who are guided by this dynamic vision, and then are finding any number of ways to then refine that and then put that back out into the world. That is like exciting stuff to me.
And it's not just conversation, though.
Yeah.
You said something about free association earlier. Yes, that happens, but there is building evidence. There's generating evidence. And so we have what we call at PK a bit team that supports the work that we're doing and helping us to identify the evidence in the direction we want to go in assessing and analyzing that information to give back valid or valid information around what we're doing. It's not just the free association.
Yeah.
I also think of, I think back, and this is probably a couple of years ago, but the hard conversations that the team has in this COP in particular, just the willingness of the team to speak up and say, hey, I don't agree with that, or hey, this is what I think, or hey, this worked here and this didn't work here. I'm remembering the conversation about that language, Lamar, around sharing power with families or giving back power to families.
Yes.
And what a rich and difficult conversation the group had about just the language that we were using there, because can we really give back something that we never should have taken, versus is it really sharing, or is it allowing or sponsoring? Like, it was such a rich conversation, but also a hard one, right? And I think the team navigated it very, very well.
It's an emancipation of sorts in a workspace, and it's a way of thinking and a way of sharing information that unfortunately some people just are unfamiliar with. And when they join PK, they are just amazed, excited, their fire is stoked, and they are just biting at the bit to get into this and really help launch and get any number of ways our vision out into the world.
Well, and you mentioned strategies earlier, because we do have in that vision the strategies. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about what those are, because really that is how we are planning on realizing that vision, right? So we have this vision, but how do we get there? And actually the team did a tremendous amount of work on setting out, here are the strategies that we either know are research-based or we believe will show impact if they're new, that will help us realize that vision. Are there any of those in particular that you guys would like to highlight or talk about?
Some of it is the old school adage, you talk the talk, you got to walk the walk, right? And I'm looking at like investing in those with lived expertise, right? So we just can't say to a jurisdiction or to a partner, this is something you should do. What does that look like for us? And so it's important to PK, and we invest in those with lived expertise. And so they are a part of our COP. They work with us on projects. They are our PK colleagues. And so that is important to us. And they are in the work. That's not their sole identity, but they are in the work with us. In the same way that we talk about demonstrating a new way of work. So if we talk about we are currently in a child welfare setting, but we want to move to child and family well-being, what does that look like? How do we articulate that in the work or the plans that we present to our clients, or in the work and the plans that we organize amongst ourselves internally? What does that look like quite literally? How do we take it from the page of our child welfare strategies into our day-to-day work? And so we do that organically in our work with our clients, in our own strategic plans and roadmaps as well. So it is doing that and investing in leadership. It's the work that we do as we talk about building external leadership teams. It is the work that we do with our leadership team when we talk about things like equity, right? Or this new way of thinking about ideas, decision-making, consensus building, all of those things. It's really, how is this the way of work for us if we say should be the way of work for others?
And I think our focus on implementation is important. We utilize implementation science to realize this vision, but it's so important that we don't just talk about change, that we help to facilitate a path to implementing that change and a fidelity to that change, and that it sticks. And we harness the moment, right? Change cannot happen without there being some catalyst. And when that catalyst presents itself, we harness the moment. We constantly look for opportunities with our clients and internally. I think we model the behaviors that we say we want to present to our clients internally, and that's important. We harness the opportunity to test our approaches, to help our clients redirect resources, and to help prevent families from having the experience that they've always had in our system, and to enhance family integrity and involvement.
So as you two know, one of our core values at PK is impact. And as you know as well, we've created this podcast around it, right? Because it's so essential to our work. And honestly, I don't think there's one person at the firm that wants to be doing work for a client that isn't impactful. I think I can say that very, very strongly. And so for us, impact means that we approach every engagement with our energy focused on identifying the right goals, outcomes, and strategies, right? Which often aren't the ones that are initially presented to us, and that we each have a personal responsibility to make a positive impact on our projects, on our clients, on our teammates, and ultimately on our world. So I'm curious, what does impact mean to you personally? And what kind of impact do you hope to have on the world?
I think of influence, both being influence and having influence, but in a positive manner. The impact that I hope to have on the world is that I leave people better than I found them, that I'm better as a result of my engagement with others, that the work that we do with clients serves the people that they intend to support and serve and do right by and do better by. Those are the impacts I would want to have. And I would like to see a groundswell of empathy and support and engagement for people, and that be the bottom line, and that there not be a dollar sign as the bottom line for humanity.
Yeah, I love that. Lamar, what does impact mean to you?
I feel a personal responsibility, and I think I touched on this at the beginning of our conversation. I feel a personal responsibility to have a seat at the table, but also reserve a seat at the table for others who historically and traditionally have not. And to help amplify their voice when it has been silenced or muffled, or when they have been pushed out or pushed down or stepped on. So for me, impact would mean to positively amplify, project, include, bring in, acknowledge all those who have not, but who are here. And because they are here in this world, they have value.
I love that too. Okay. Well, what do you guys think will change in the child welfare system and the world because of our work on this vision? Not just the two of you, but globally with all of our teammates and our clients and our work in this area. What do you think is going to change based on our work towards this vision?
Oh, wow. That's like, oh.
Gets me excited, actually, this one.
For me, and anybody who knows me, and Glenda's laughing. I know you all can't see us in podcast land, but she's laughing because I speak in like Southern colloquialisms all the time. It's like, to whom much is given, much is required. And as I think about us as a nation, we are influential globally in so many ways. What an obligation to positively impact and influence good in all the ways that we know, to be inclusive, to lift families up, or to help them lift themselves up, to be a North Star for what is right, what it means for folks to have access to healthcare, what it means for folks to have economic security, or for folks to not be in fear of overregulation around family separation. What could it mean for our nation to stand out in that regard, and to think that jurisdiction by jurisdiction, state by state, we could have some small part, some large part in that? For me, actually, I think I feel my pulse quickening by that. It's just, the thought of that is remarkable.
What could change by us doing this work? Our presence alone creates a change. Sure. It creates, the vision creates the opportunity, and nothing changes without first an opportunity and an interest in change. What has to change is the way we treat our families. What has to change is the value we place on our children. That's our future. What has to change is our belief in that future, and not identifying any one entity, one race, one creed, one anything as premier, and that's going to save our country. Collectively, whenever there's a problem, it takes all of us to save it, to respond to it. And that has to be the same sentiment in the child welfare system. We have families, children, units, communities that matter, that are a part of the larger community. And so what changes is the way we identify family, the way we identify community, the way we connect with each other in those spaces where there has not been a connection in the past. What that creates change.
Yeah. So what does the success of that change look like? So what would our world look like if we had success in realizing this vision? What would be different about our system and our communities?
I think we would first start with community-based services. I think the idea of surveilling people, the judgment that goes along with that, would go away. It would be extending a helping hand rather than judging the behaviors. It would be identifying behaviors rather than penalizing people. It would be finding broader solutions to consistent problems that have been pervasive for years, rather than identifying it as a problem of the individual.
Lamar, what does success look like to you?
Involving in the very beginning those who are closest to this. So many times the decision-making for communities and families could not be farther away. I think you talked about this, Stacey, right? Families are the experts in their lives, but many times all the decisions around where they go, how the food in the community, where the food comes from in their community, where the books are, if they have a library, what resources their school has. All those decisions are made by people many times who have quite possibly may have never set foot in the community. How do we restore, and I even feel funny saying the word restore, but how do we bring decision making as close to those to whom it impacts?
So for those that haven't worked in the child welfare field before, I think oftentimes they think of the families that are in the child welfare system are ones that are severely physically or sexually abusing their children. And you both have worked obviously in busy counties and busy systems. Is that your experience? Is that the majority of the families and parents that you saw in those systems or see today?
Without fail, Stacy, the majority of substantiated child abuse, if you will, cases involve neglect. And oftentimes neglect, as Lamar said earlier, is conflated with poverty.
Yeah. That's 100% my experience as well.
Less than 20% of substantiated cases are physical sexual abuse.
Yeah.
And 50% or more families who are known to the child welfare agency in a jurisdiction are usually known to the economic support agency, whatever agency is responsible for administering the TANF, SNAP benefits. So that's some compelling information.
Yeah, I think the data speaks for itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
That at this point in time, and at least for the last 2 decades that I've been involved, the majority of the families that we are dealing with in the child welfare field are dealing with poverty, and they're dealing with a lack of a support system, right? Or a village or a family surrounding them and helping them. And I just think, and Glenda, you may be able to understand this, but I think as a mom, because I am a mother, and I think of at different times, in my history of being a mother where I have hit challenging situations or challenging times, and how differently I've handled it when I've had, a community of support around me versus not. And I am probably 1,000 times more privileged in this world than any of the families I've ever dealt with. And it was a struggle for me. And I think that is really, at this point, the majority of the families that we are serving as a system. And I think trying to change that, right, in the public's eye, to understand that just because a family is involved right now in the child welfare system does not necessarily mean that there was serious physical or sexual abuse. And that is why I think we all collectively, right, as a company and as a COP, want to change how we serve families, and why, Glenda said it's all about that community. How do we have community-based services? How do we support those parents? How do we help them before things become riskier or scarier or more challenging for that family? Okay. So each quarter, our podcast has a different theme, and this quarter's theme is lived expertise. And we talked a little bit about it earlier, but I didn't stop you to talk any more about what it is, because I knew we were coming back to it. So people that have that lived experience or that lived expertise are those that are directly affected, right, by our programs and services, whether that's social or health or public health, child welfare, and by the kind of strategies or systems that we use to address those issues. And that gives them, right, a unique and what I would call expert level, right, insight that can really help us inform or improve our systems, our policies, our practices, and our programs. So when you think about our child welfare vision, how is it prioritizing or elevating lived expertise? And why is that important in the child welfare field?
Those are the voices of experience. How can it not be important? How do we support that? By giving them an opportunity, not giving, I feel like Lamar now, giving them, moving out of the way, allowing the space for them to have the opportunity to elevate their voices and their experiences. But in addition to that, I think we spend time, something I call the 3 S's. We shepherd them. Sometimes we have to shelter them, but most importantly, we support them. Our investment has been very obvious to me. And I also see it with some of our partners. And I think there are ways to elevate it. There are ways to enhance it. There are ways to highlight it for the larger child welfare community so that we can help others to understand the value of that perspective and how it enhances the work that we do when we clearly know and see what the experiences are of the people that are being served by these particular entities.
What is the value that you would say that lived expertise has brought to our systems and our organizations? What's the value that you would describe to, let's say, a new client?
And I'm going to get really, really concrete for a minute. When I think about how we design and establish our solutions for clients and present it to them, there's a part of our work where we talk about assumptions. And assumptions for me means here's what the client will bring to the work so that we can get the work done. And we will talk about engagement. Who are the folks who it's essential that they are available and present in meetings, decision-making. And for my past 2.5 years at PK, I don't know that I've ever seen a piece of work or a proposed piece of work where we didn't say an individual with lived expertise must be at the table. And that's essential because as we are working to enhance, redesign, reform, or create new services, programming, funding structures, how could you not have at top of mind and have someone available and at many points driving the conversation around what this should look like, how it impacted them directly, what the impact could be for those around them real time and those in the future. It's integral to decision making. It's like, how could you build a bridge without an engineer? Right? I think it's quite literally that critical and essential to the process. For me, many folks may think about it as a nice to do. For me, this is a must do. I don't know how you will begin the work without those who are most impacted by the work.
And I would think that some of the intangible benefits are it brings awareness, it brings perspective. It's very different from one's own. It also breaks stereotypes.
Yeah.
And ultimately provides inclusion, helping to come to a better solution when there's inclusion of diversity of thought.
That's so eloquent, Glenda. You said that far better than I did.
If you think about your own individual experiences with lived expertise at any point in your career, what's been the value to you personally?
Some of my greatest teachers in the work, to be quite honest. There's no new worker curriculum. There is no supervisory curriculum. There is no onboarding for a new director, for a state leader, anything that I've gone through that could have shared with me and impacted me, as we talk about impact, as much as sitting down with the young person in care or who has recently left care, sitting down with a young father who has a child in care or who's recently returned, who they've been recently reunified. Those lessons and what the impact of the system has had on their family or the trajectory of their life has stayed with me far longer than any curriculum or any training that I've gone through. In fact, I still have a picture and a painting that a young man made for me. And it's a picture of he wore red Converse Chuck All-Stars. And they look worn and tattered. And then it says at the bottom, if you could have walked a day in my life. And I still have that now 15 years later.
Glenda, what's been the value to you individually?
A couple of things come to mind. One, I can honestly say that it validates some of my own personal experiences, say in the workplace, parallel experiences, not the exact same, but the same emotion, the same feeling, the same dissonance. It really does validate that, and it helps me to understand some of the experiences that our lived expertise have gone through. I also remember a time when I almost got in trouble my first year on the job because I had a male client with a single father come in to apply for, then it was AFDC. That tells y'all how old I am. It's 10 now. And there was a lot of consternation around he should find a job and those kinds of sentiments, right? He brought this young lady in, and while he's applying for benefits, looking at her hair, and he doesn't know what to do with it. And she has more hair than I've seen on any two people, maybe you, Stacey.
I was gonna say I might challenge that.
Yeah. So I asked his permission first, or ask if he needed any assistance, and then I asked his permission to help him. So while I am interviewing him, I'm braiding his daughter's hair. My county director comes around at about the time I'm on the third braid, and I thought, oh, good, I'm going to lose my job. Fortunately, he had the foresight to see that as a value to the client as well. Yeah. And the next month, I was Employee of the Month, and I thought, really? I was just doing what was right. I don't need this. Yeah. But those are the things that make me recognize the value of the experience that people who have lived this have. We see the simplest things and we're willing to judge. I couldn't say, oh, wow, you need to get her hair done. You need to
get on top of this. Yeah. Figure this out. It's our
responsibility to support and help in ways that are non-traditional.
So if we have listeners who are looking to add lived expertise to their projects or their programs or their organization, do you have any tips, tricks, or advice for them?
Don't expect it to be easy.
Oh, so good.
Don't expect it to be easy. People come with baggage, whether they have lived expertise or not. We come every day with our little bags, and sometimes we open them up at work and sometimes we keep them closed. But there should be no expectation that they will come to you perfectly prepared to enter into this space. That's why I say shepherd, shelter, and support them. Be prepared to mentor if necessary, provide guidance, but allow them to tell you what they need. Don't assume. You're not babysitting. You're gaining value from their presence. Create a space for them to be able to share those things with you.
Great. Lamar, any tips, tricks, or advice?
One, compensate them as if this was any other expertise. Professional expertise. And then two, although the opportunity may present because of a specific expertise, like any of us, we are multidimensional. Don't pigeonhole people into one aspect of their life. Whatever their particular expertise is or lived expertise is, there are so many other dimensions to people. Allow them to express that and not simply have them show up for this one part, although important, of who they are.
I would also encourage that you allow that person to disclose their experience and not lead with, this is our lived expert.
Yes. That's very good advice. I think that is how we get into what we call that tokenizing, right? Is if there's an expert at the table, then we're good, check that box. And that's not the goal, right? The goal isn't to have one person in the room that we can say we did that. It really is to do exactly what you guys are talking about, is how do we integrate, right? That and multiple perspectives, because everyone's experience is different. And how do we integrate that into our work day to day? All right. So let's talk a bit about progress. So one of our aspirational values is progress, which is all about that kind of collective power of our impact, right? Building upon one project, building upon another, really advancing towards leaving this world better than when we started. And really, this is the reward, right, for generating that evidence that you talked about earlier, Glenda, and to better understand what works, right, in the field and how do we impact the field. So I'm curious, if we look at our child welfare vision, how is it a continuation of other work that we've done at the firm or other work that we've done as individuals that has ultimately gotten us, that much farther into our progress? Where are the roots?
I think the roots come from lessons learned. Every opportunity that we take to evaluate how we performed, and I use perform loosely, on a project, how we met the needs of that client and exceeded when possible. We take those lessons and apply them to the next iteration of the work. And that helps us to progress, grow, identify ways to enhance, identify ways for us to grow individually and collectively as a team. So lessons learned is one of the things that stands out for me.
I was going in the exact same place, Glenda. It is those lessons learned. And as a management consulting firm, I think we are uniquely positioned, right, as we're working with multiple jurisdictions or partners at a time, right, to really begin to lift from one to the other. And you begin to test, you begin to refine. You may have started out with X number of strategies, 10, these 5 really work. You take these 5 to the next jurisdiction. You get really, really precise and refined with these 3. These 3, you then really begin to look at some data, see how you respond, and then that really begins to become a way of work. And we're really beginning to see that traction in many areas, right? And that's also a part of, and I use the word incubator, that's part of what happens in those communities of practice also. Real time, as we are working with clients, we are bringing the work back, what's happening, what's working well, what do we want to tweak, what does it look like, what's the consideration for the next time, how else can we think about this? That's the real work that happens every day, all day, and then you apply it to the next, and then the next, and the next.
Well, and I think that actually takes me to kind of the end of that vision document, right? Where it's really kind of our big innovation is these demonstration sites around the replacement work, right? So if we talk about family integrity and justice and how we're trying to find locations, locales, or states who are interested in kind of replacing rather than continually trying to just Band-Aid or little bits of improvement, right? But really try to overhaul and take how we've done child welfare and replace it with something completely different that is more strengths-based and focused on the family and the community, like we've been talking about. That really, that is our incubator, right? How do we, this is how we're trying to kind of contribute to progress, but to move it faster, right? Rather than the continual little improvements, how do we kind of start afresh with something and then use our BIT team that Glenda mentioned earlier, right? Our business intelligence and impact team to measure that so that we can show that progress over time. What would you say is most exciting about kind of that vision that we have for replacement and those demonstration sites? Just for you two personally, what's most exciting about that work and what's possible around that progress that we could make?
The idea of radically changing the experience that families and children have in the system is the ultimate outcome for me. In any system, if we can offer respect and engagement in a way that really matters, we can make a difference. And to be disruptors of the current system does not mean that we are against anything that has happened and that we don't support the fact that this is what it was and how it was, and we accept that, but can it be better? That's the question we're trying to answer. How can it be better? And are you willing to take that leap of faith to be a trailblazer in trying to make it better for families? So that if we can make that change, that is the most exciting for me.
Yeah.
And well, Glenda, you said something earlier that resonated with me. And not for me, not only now listening to you, not only change this experience, but if we can mitigate or eliminate the need for experience with the child welfare system, right? Or when we think about demonstration sites, I don't want people to get so boxed into a child welfare agency is the only agency that can lead this change or demonstrate this, right? We just talked about a few minutes earlier that the child welfare system are all of these family and child serving agencies. So it would be exciting to me if if a school district really wanted to think about, hey, we really are going to think about how we can think about our policies are related to who we refer to child welfare, what type of community-based interventions or prevention services can we do to really stop at the front end, bring in child welfare as our partner, but we want to be the lead in this work, right? As we know, where many of the calls come from related to education and law enforcement, like, to me, things like that are exciting. And so I want our superintendents, I want our healthcare system leaders to think about, hey, these are our families, these are our kids, these are our communities, right? And ensuring that families are healthy, whole, and thriving isn't just simply the job of a child welfare director. It's everybody's business. And shouldn't we all want to be about having and carving out a different experience for families who may at some point in time have a vulnerability or need some support?
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with both of you. And I think the piece that sticks out to me most around that demonstration work is kind of what we talked about earlier, which is the majority of the families that are involved in the child welfare system don't necessarily need to be involved in the child welfare system. And most importantly, they need to be kept together as an intact family. And I think well-intentioned actors, right? Like not a bad intention at all, have removed children from their parents and have done so much more harm than was already there to begin with, right? Because the second you take away those kids, if they are in poverty, they lose their TANF, they lose, their support because they have to go to meetings in court. Sometimes they lose their job, right? So we've just exacerbated that poverty issue that kind of was the beginning of that risky situation, rather than trying to figure out some creative solutions, right, to support that family. And part of that is how the funding works in the world that we live in. And part of it is, I think, just a shift in how we value, right, those parents and those families when they look different and feel different than our own families. That's the part about those demonstration sites that excites me the most, for sure. So you guys talked about lessons learned being a huge part about progress, which is definitely where my head is when I think about progress. And I'm thinking about whether we fail at something or whether we win at something, we're learning, right? And we're passing that learning on to future projects. So I'm curious if there are any lessons learned that you guys have from your own past experience that you take forward, right, to the next project that may help a client or a listener ultimately kind of move the needle and make more progress even more. Is there anything that you feel like you can share?
Oh, Stacy, that's loaded.
So I don't know if it's a personal thing, but I think it's also, in addition to lessons learned, it's important to introduce our clients to innovations that can help to support that progress. Oftentimes we use old standards, old measures, old tools, old resources, old perspective. So innovation of thought, innovation of resource tools, ideas, that I think that's really important to progress.
I do
So
too.
oftentimes we ask questions, be curious, like you say, ask questions, engage in additional learning, research that supports innovative ways to move the needle are things that I think are relative and important to progress.
Lamar, what about you? What lessons learned would you share with our listeners?
For me, it is just continuing to reinforce that we always must be in tune and listen to the client. Never lose sight of that. Never be afraid to, you have to constantly monitor and adjust. Never be afraid to change course when you really see that you need to. Especially for the sake of advancing the work and supporting the efforts of communities and ultimately what the client needs as well. Those are top of mind for me. And then many of the points that Glenda had resonated with me as well, but it really is to always listen to and keep top of mind what the client is saying, and don't be afraid to make a tough decision or change course.
Yeah, and often when we change courses, we do far more good than when we're trying to
Yes.
stick with something because it's what we started and we put so much effort into it.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I'm actually looking forward to this last piece to close us out because, as well as you both probably know, I respect you both as people and colleagues so much. You've given me such good advice and just so much support over the last few years. And I am really looking forward to your advice on these two topics. So, as you know, we built this podcast around one of our 3 core values around impact. But to close out each of our podcasts, we're asking our guests to share their wisdom on our other 2 core values with our audience. So, what we're looking for is just your best advice for our audience on achieving our other 2 core values, inclusion and teamwork. No wrong answers. And we'll just take one at a time and share what you think or what is top of mind today. And for the listeners, I hope you're listening because you get the advice from 2 of the smartest people I know when it comes to inclusion and teamwork. So So no pressure.
Clearly.
Yeah, no pressure. The first one is just what is your best advice for achieving high levels of inclusion in the workplace?
Communications, communications, communications.
Mhm.
Create an environment where people feel safe. Don't be afraid to have the difficult conversations.
Yeah.
Leave space for others.
So important. Lamar, what about you? High levels of inclusion.
Invite people into decision making, sharing decision making. And you first must have authentic trust and be able to communicate expectations. And from that, then it gives way to you sharing decision making. People feel invested and then included. And the decision may not look like what you would necessarily decide on, but they're
Often doesn't.
often doesn't, right? But it can still get you to the desired outcome. That also is a part of relinquishing control, particularly if you're in a project management or a leadership role. It is relinquishing control, perceived control.
Yes. I think that might be one of the biggest lessons I've learned in the last 3 years. It's just, having that trust, right? And that faith that the decision will get made the right way, regardless of whether you're in it or not. And it's a hard leap, but it's so fun to watch and see what comes out when you're not. Okay. And then the last one is just what is your best advice for achieving high levels of teamwork in the workplace?
Accountability. And what I mean by that, sometimes accountability is a dirty word.
Yeah.
But it is around promoting a sense of individual and team accountability. So really, and I'm in a team environment, how do you reinforcing to everyone what our individual responsibility is to ourselves, and then subsequently, what's your responsibility to the team or accountable, or how are you accountable? And if people are aligned in that, the teamwork usually comes and presents itself and takes care of itself.
And Glenda?
Absolutely agree with that. Responsibility to and for the team, for each and every member, not just the perceived leader of the team, but each and every member has responsibility to and for each other. I also would offer that teamwork is not possible without inclusion. So all of the things that we said about inclusion have to be a part of the team in order for a team to function successfully. And that constant communication, engagement, the lack of fear around sharing what your thoughts are, or being willing to say, I don't know if that's going to work, or I have a better idea, or I have an idea, it may or may not be better. But teamwork requires that level of comfortness. Yeah, that feels like an old sock that just fits. It may have holes in it, because no team is perfect, That's my South Carolina colloquialism, Lamar.
You showed your true side.
I love it. I knew it would come out. I knew it would come out before
So
the
yeah,
podcast.
he's the colloquial and I'm the storyteller. So I've been trying to edit my words. But really, and understanding each of your team members and accepting the gifts that they bring individually and collectively to the team. Everybody doesn't have the same talents, gifts, experience, but they all bring something that's necessary.
Yeah. You guys actually hit on something that I've actually never said on the podcast before, but our 3 core values are so intertwined and in some ways reliant on each other, right? I always think of inclusion being the most important because without that, you can't have teamwork. And without teamwork, you can't have impact. And I actually don't even know that I've said that out loud at the firm, but and I'm really glad you brought it up because not only are they integral to each other, but you really have to have one before the next and then before the next and I think often in the workplace or in our work, we're so focused, right, on the outcomes and on impact without realizing that if you're not spending that time to slow down, right, and focus on inclusion first and building those effective teams second, you're never actually going to get to impact. Because you're going to get in your way. There's going to be barriers along the way. And you hit on so many of them, right? With your examples, people won't speak up. It's a fear-based, world. They're not going to share their opinions when they don't agree. They're not going to share their ideas when they have better ideas. People aren't going to listen to them when they have those ideas. There's just so many barriers that are in the way. So thanks for reminding me about how integral they are to each other. All right. Anything else you guys want to share today?
As much as we always talk and work together, you always learn something new when you're in a different space and setting.
Yeah.
So I appreciate the time with both of you today.
Me too. And I can't thank you enough for your time. It's been a privilege to be here with you today, to connect, to learn, to grow, to breathe, and to share. Until next time, this is Stacy signing off.